Aha, this meeting is being live streamed. Got it. Press the button, son. Hello, everybody. I hope you're all keeping well in these very, very interesting times. Let me just go to my phone and just see if this is coming up on my phone, because that's where I can see comments coming in. There we are. So that's now ready for any comments to come in, and I will do my best to look at some of those comments and maybe answer them if they're appropriate. So to all you scoundrels and scallywags out there, appropriate comments, please. So this is, and welcome to session 10 of the IAM approach to health and well-being. It's called Principles Before Personalities. Hello, Ernestine. Lovely to see you, and congratulations on all your good news. Keep going and let them have it. Let them have it. Right. Yeah, session 10, Principles Before Personalities. And what does that mean? It basically means stick to your principles and stand up for yourself, no matter who you're dealing with, basically. And that's something that I've had to learn for myself over the years. Being born a highly sensitive child, right? I always sort of hid in the far corner away from people because I never had any self-confidence or self-worth. And I didn't know how to hold a conversation with anybody, and I couldn't look anybody in the eyes and all those sorts of things, you know. So I've sort of grown up through this, and I can see that most of my problems were because of my sensitivity, which turned into really emotional insecurity based upon, and I didn't want to hear this, but this is just my story, based upon emotional immaturity. And I realized that in order to grow through these things, it means facing fears, really, and also understand how false pride can also block you away from what you need and the actions that we need to take. I feel like, once again, well, I am a lecturer, so that's what I do for a living, right? But sometimes I get into like Pope Joe, you know. But this evening's session will be a sort of follow-on from last week's session, which hit a few people hard, because really, I think in this time of the great shift of consciousness, it's almost like there's a great big mirror being held up to all of us, where we have to face ourselves, and rather than look outwards for solutions, is to look inwards for the solutions. Because I honestly believe, based on my personal experience and the experience of thousands and thousands of others that I've talking to, is rather than expect, it would be to turn your head round and your eyes round and start inspecting, really. And that's what I'm doing. I'm doing it all the time. Have I got it cracked? Not in the slightest. I've learned a lot about myself, and consequently, I can see it in other people. But I feel that it's a never-ending journey, really. And whether it's the progress of the human being, or whether it's the progress of the soul's evolution working through the human being, I'm not altogether sure, but I feel it's that second one, the latter. So anyway, on that note, and I've got all my friends here. There's a Kuan Yin. Hello, Kuan Yin. I hope the weather's nice over there in Belgium. And you're not eating too many Brussels sprouts, right? Or that fine chocolate that's produced over there in Belgium. And Tamara, hello, Tamara. And Annette, it's nice to see you. Nice to see you. And, well, I can't see you, but you know what I mean. So here's the plan. I'm going to rattle on about this next phase, really, about overcoming fear and pride, because I honestly believe that they're the only two obstructions that prevent us from moving forward on this journey. And I'll explain that. And people say there's only really two emotions, fear and love. Well, I don't see it like that myself. The fear and pride I'm talking about really is the individual human's split personality, really. And depending upon the egomania and the split, it will cause all sorts of different problems. So the idea would be really is to bring the child self and the parent self, which I'll talk about, allow them to work together in a nurturing way to help us all to go forward. So that's what I'm talking about. Hello, David. Nice to see you. So let me just share the screen. And from time to time, I'll just belt up and I'll look at my phone and see if there's any comments. So share screen. There we are. Okay, so as I say, this is the I am approach. And why is it called I am? Because the I am from ancient cultures is understood to be the source of all creation, the essential source, the prime mover, the prime creator. And from there, in the great bang, the great big bang, right? And I know it's not exactly like that, and there's all sorts of different ways of looking at it, but this is the way that I'm happy in my mind to understand it. And then this great thing here particularized and became particles. The particles then condensed and became stars, and then star clusters. The star clusters then formed galaxies. The galaxies condensed even further and formed planets and stars. And that's Earth was formed, and then we popped along here on Earth. So that's how I see it all going. So the idea would be is to understand how all these different levels of energy started to condense and how it eventually sort of ended up with us. That's where I'm up to with my understanding of these things. So the session outline is we'll have a little look at what we did in the last session, and then I'll just sort of explain what I think is meant by personality, because this is about putting principles, spiritual principles, before personalities. And then we look at what is character. I should have put a question mark there. I'll have to have a word with myself and get my quality control sorted out. What are the two main obstacles to freedom? Well, if you were listening from the beginning, you already know what they are. And are you fleeing or are you flowing? And all that simply means is, are you in a state of what's called egocentric contraction, where you're on the defensive and you're living in constant fight, flight, or fleeing mode? Or are you flowing, which means that all your bits and pieces, all your organs, your musculoskeletal system, your thinking, your emotions are all coherent and working in harmony with one another? So we'll talk about that as we go forward. And I'll give you some simple practices for the release and the relief of this contractive state, these, to be freed from the bondage of self, really. And all I can do is say how I see things. Different people might have different words for these things, but, I'm not going to argue over the meaning of words. It's the underlying principles that are important, really. And then we'll conclude. And if there's time and anybody fancies it, I might try and get them on if they want to talk about anything specific. Because I haven't done that before, and it might be a bit of sort of excitement. Although I don't feel very excited today. I feel absolutely knackered because the last few days has been really, really strange. That's all I can say. I've nearly been knocked off my feet a couple of times today, presumably by this influx of energy that's coming from, first of all, the great central sun, or the I am, through our sun, and then great big waves coming from these solar releases. Anyway, I digress, as I always do. So we looked last week at what is an ego threat. And I honestly believe that the ego is basically the human being. It's basically the mind and body, or basically the mechanics or the vehicle through which the soul works. And I think what happens sometimes is, I think that the ego, if it's particularly born sensitive, it will put up right from an early age a set of coping skills and strategies that will defend it from all these so-called external threats. So I don't think that we have to get rid of the ego as such, because that to me is the sort of the central feature of the human being. I think what we have to get, we have to rebalance really is the egomania. It's the split, really. And I think I was diagnosed when I was going through all my journeys and my problems with something called manic depression at one point, and that's where I could be as high as a kite one moment and as low as anything the next moment, So there was obviously, quite a split between these two characteristics. And I see now also that this is really about understanding the bipolarity or the androgyny of the human being, And I think anything that perceptually represents a threat to the ego, right, or undermines the ego's self-esteem, self-worth, or perception, that's what the ego threat is. And it can evoke, and this is the difficulty, it can evoke powerful emotional responses and defensive mechanisms as individuals strive to protect their safe self-image. And this would be called saving face. And then what I've learned is, in the end, is rather than trying to defend and save face all the time, it was not to be bothered about saving face, really. And it was almost like to take off the masks and to sort of get naked in the character. And I think I mentioned before is, what's the difference then between a personality and a character? As far as I see it, personality means persona from the Greek means mask. And I think what we do is, as children, right, we develop this almost like second nature, coping strategies, and then we become really that defensive creature, really, who will do anything to avoid, what's the word I'm looking for? Threat, ego threat. So ducking and diving and dodging and weaving based upon different characteristics. So I'll talk about that further as we go along. So ego threats can elicit defensive responses such as denial. Now, I heard a thing a few weeks back, and I'd not heard it before, and it's really good, is that denial stands for don't even notice I am lying. And that's where I was for many, many years. I didn't have a clue. I had this head up here, right, that thought it knew what it was talking about. But when I really found out, when I really got ill, I realized that most of the processing of the information that was coming through was actually going below the level of my consciousness. And what I was doing is I was basically trying to defend myself, right, against these attacks based upon loads and loads of different things hiding in my unconscious. And I've said this before. Somebody said to me once, "You're only as sick as your secrets." And I was terribly offended by that, right? But I realized today, when it was explained to me, that we repress and suppress all the things we feel guilty about, all the things that we feel afraid of, all the things that we've done that we don't want anybody else to know. It's almost like we try and hide them away from ourselves. And it's clear to everybody around us what we're doing, except for us. And there's that expression is, I was always the last to know, but my head told me that I was switched on, I was streetwise, I was aware, I was I laugh now, and this is basically very serious stuff, but I laugh and I just can't identify with that person, and it's almost like I'm saying is, why couldn't I see it? I couldn't see it because I was afraid, I was ashamed, I was in denial of all sorts of different things, And rationalization, that's when we try and defend ourselves and we can put up a big cloud screen so as not to let anybody get too close to us. So we can either do it that way, and that starts with justifications. It's just, I did this just because, you see. And if you're ever working with anybody, if they keep coming up with justs and rationalizations, it's probable, and they mightn't even know about it, that it's a defense mechanism that's below the levels of consciousness. So if any of these things sort of pop out to you, it may be worthwhile making a little note and just look at some of the stuff that's just about to come up. Christy, my love, how are you? That's nice to see you. I know that Christy's not on the screen. She's sent me a note, that's all. So ego threat again is recognizing and managing ego threats is absolutely crucial for maintaining psychological, and when I say psychological, I mean both mental and emotional balance and well-being, and more and more I see that we talk about mental health, but really it's emotional health that I feel provides the motivation either for going forward or defending ourselves. So this is really about promoting personal growth by getting honest with ourselves, essentially. And this is where we were up to, really, that many of us maybe started off healthy, and we try and keep healthy by doing all sorts of physical activities and going to health spas and sanitariums and stuff like that. But as the pressure comes on for various reasons, and I believe it's meant to be, there's a global shift. There are astrological changes happening in the universe, and we're all feeling the effects of this. So it's almost like as the pressure increases, even though we've been maybe good at coping with stuff before, we start to fall in this coping range where we're just getting on with it. And as the pressure increases, if we try and carry on doing what we did before, you know that one, if you keep doing what you always did, you'll keep getting what you always got. Well, I honestly believe that we're almost being forced, and this is what the Zen say, let go or be dragged. We're almost being forced to let go of our old habits and start to develop new habits now based upon care, compassion, kindness, community, collaboration. Oh, I'm in the flow. I think I'll keep going. You know, and then if we can do that and let go, and then start to work from spiritual principles of compassion and care, then we can go back towards being healthy. However, and this is what I did for years, and it nearly saw me off, I would hang on and I would try like mad to stay the way that I was. I would manipulate and try and change everything on the outside of me, including other people. And then I got into this really struggling mess here. And then when I wouldn't let go, then I became very, very unwell. And in the end, I hit what's called the rock bottom. And I honestly believe that I feel that everybody on the planet, every human being at some point needs to hit a rock bottom where they've tried absolutely everything to improve the quality of their life, but they just can't anymore. But there is a solution, you know, and it took me a long time to do it. But the solution is to let go, to surrender, and allow your own innate intelligence to come up and show you how things are done, really. And as we go further forward on this, I'll explain it further forward. So some people, if you're Christians, you would see this as a crucifixion point, really, where everybody goes through it. Jesus would say, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, God, why have you forsaken me? And if in that surrender, then God stepped in to say, son, been trying to tell you for ages. Pay attention, learn to listen, and just start taking these steps backwards. And that's what's happened to me. You know, it's nearly 33 years now since I made some serious attempts to do myself in. And I was introduced to a spiritual life. And when I say, and this is only for me, when I say a spiritual life, I just mean a set of spiritual principles based upon truthfulness, honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness to just keep going, really. And my life's been transformed. Does it mean I've become a saint? Far from it. Far from it. And it's not religion. I'm not a religious person, but I believe wholeheartedly that the way forward for mankind is really honesty and spirituality. Anyway, I digress as always. So, and this is how we do it. Generally speaking, in the Western world, or the modern world we live in, if we get any physical symptoms or even psychological ones, we go to the doctor and they'll tend to look at the physicality first, or the biomedical model. You know, we hardly ever talk, although it's coming to the fore more and more now, about emotional state. But then we get into the intellectual, what we know, and the knowledge base. And generally speaking, this is a 3D, you know, world that most human beings live in. And this is where I was for a long time. I was trying to use my knowledge and my physicality in order to survive in the world. I just pushed all this stuff down here. And all the energy that I used to keep these suppressed emotions down absolutely exhausted me. So I found that if I drink as much as I could, smoked as much as I could, took handfuls and handfuls of Pro Plus and other substances to keep me stimulated, then I could cope, right? But over the years, as I got more and more fatigued and exhausted and needed more and more drink, more and more high-powered sedatives. So I was medicating myself all the time on uppers, downers, and round the corners, and I was just falling apart rapidly, But then I was introduced to this thing here called the spiritual component. And I believe that that's the access point in what's called the fourth dimension, and the fourth dimension of the second, or the first dimension of the second density. And once I started to follow these principles and understand them and take action on them, my life started to change. And this is how I see these things, really, is if we pay attention and get balance in all these different components, then we can become a full spectrum human being, and we can achieve self-mastery and also self-actualization. And there's lots of psychology that I'll talk about in a minute that knows about this stuff anyway, but doesn't know the solution. Shall I say the important thing here? Yeah. You see, part of me knew what to do, but the problem was I didn't have enough power to do it. So every time I tried to change, I was ambushed all the time because I didn't have enough power to maintain it. So it wasn't knowing what to do that was the problem. The lack of power was the dilemma. And that's so important. And that's why modern medicine, unfortunately, doesn't understand that at the moment, because it will not let go of the understanding that there's an innate intelligence in all of us, that if we listen to it and take the steps that it prompts us to do, then new power flows in. Every time we overcome a fear, every time we take an action against what we used to do in the past, right, new power flows in. It revitalizes us. It gives us more courage to go forward, and it improves the quality of our life, And I feel that hopefully that you'll get some understanding of this as we go along, based upon my experience. As I said before, have I got it cracked? No way at all. I don't believe anybody's got it cracked. I think that we all see things from a different angle. And if we can share our experience, strength, and hope with each other, maybe talk about the problem. This is the situation I was in. Here's the solution I found. If we can actually share in that open and honest way, I really think that it will inspire and help other people to do the same thing as well. Hello, let's see who we've got here. Donna. Hello, Donna. Nice to see you. Caroline, my love. Kath. Hello, Kath. Gary Armstrong, what are you doing? Okay. Comfortable in our discomfort, indeed. Or we can take tablets to be comfortable in our discomfort. So it's a dynamic process. It's a process that moves. Now, this is the solution, in my understanding, is we tap into the spiritual. We tap into our innate intelligence. That then will guide us through our emotions. So our feelings, emotion means energy for movement, and motion and motivation go together. And most of us think we know what we're motivated to do and we've got it covered. And most of us have got no idea, based upon my experience, because we tend as human beings to hide one motive under another. Or should I say, that's what I did. I'm sure none of you listening to this do that. And then what happens then is our emotions, which are based on instincts, our instincts can either be knocking hell out of one another, where mine were for years, or they can start to cooperate with one another and achieve balance and send more positive messages then to our knowledge base. And then we can take the action that we need to do. So rather than work this way around, from the physical biomedical model to the biopsychosocial model, we start with spirituality. Part of me doesn't like doing this because I don't get any feedback from the audience as such, So when I'm actually doing sort of person skin meetings, where you're actually in a room with other human beings, I feel it's much better because I can sort of pick up what's going on. But I hope this is making some sort of sense anyway. So that's what we're looking for, really. And, from the traditional Chinese medicine and from Taoism, we're looking at really the flow of energies. And there are so many different forms of energy, and I believe the model I work to is, I think in this little box of space and time that we're in, I think that we've got 15 dimensions and they're all related to different frequencies and vibrations of energy. And I think what actually happens is, in the beginning was the word, there was sound. The sound, then actually it was the sound, or the womb, the sacred feminine. Out of that came the light. And then from the light, then there was a sort of descension into materialization. And I think if we can start to understand that, it's almost like a quantum physics thing. But I think that we have 4 densities as such, that have sort of sub-densities or sub-dimensions, where the first dimension is the third. So 1, 2, 3, 3D, and that's the human being. And then we're sort of being urged now and uplifted to let go of the old stuff, the lower self, and be carried up into more higher vibrations. I don't know whether this is making sense, but I'm just trying to explain it. Now, this, I did put this up last week, but I think it will be useful to explain it this week, really. And this is, I've knocked this up, really. It's based upon Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I know that it's a sort of what they call a taxonomy, where one step builds on another. It doesn't actually work like that in my mind. I see these all the spheres and stuff. But the first thing we do is, these 3 instincts represents our 3D growth. So we're born, and the first instinct that comes online is our primary instinct to protect ourselves, to have warmth, to have shelter, to have food, and so anything that threatens that will keep our consciousness in this bottom rung of the ladder. Now, what I'm going to say now is almost coded, but sometimes there are external organizations and nefarious forces who are trying to keep us afraid. So this is fear, really. They're all to do with fear. And when we're all we can think about is the next meal, where we're going to live, and all that sort of thing, we can't then evolve and develop our own thinking. We can almost pin down into this sort of primary level of frightened human being. So if we can understand this, and then know that deep within us is a resource or a mechanism that we can tap into and ask for intelligent navigation aids, then that's the way that we can go forward. We can take the action prompted by our intuition and inspiration, and we can then go forward then and start to move up. The second instinct that comes online is the instinct to go out and procreate then. And that happens in all of us. But also, right, we can have ideas here. So let me just explain this. In this one here, right, I don't know whether I put the 12 sphere thing up, but it might have. In this one here, this represents our physicality. So this represents whether we're male or female. You're generally only one or the other. So this is to do with our sexual status, right? As we move up, then this becomes about our gender. So this is, you can either be either or here, right? Or you can be both and here, because this is where the male and female bit here, right? We then transcend then, and this becomes masculine and feminine, right? And all of us, this is the androgynous bit, all of us, whether we like it or not, we've got feminine hormones in us, and we've got male hormones in us. And this actually works in all cells of the body, but that's a story for another day. So, for example, we can have estrogen and testosterone here. Estrogen's associated with the feminine, testosterone with the masculine. But what I'm saying is, all human beings have a mixture of these things. And if you're a fella with a load of estrogen in you, then you might have a lot of feminine-like tendencies. Now, I don't want to cause trouble here, right? But I'm just going to say it anyway. So you may be, on the bottom half, you may be male, but on your top half, you might be extremely sensitive, nurturing, caring, and compassionate, right? I think I'm this person. I think I always have been, but I couldn't sort of accept it, because I was too busy trying to look hard and play rugby and do all these things, when really I hated every single moment of it. That's why I had to drink to do these things. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is, I describe myself as gay from the waist up. You know what I mean? And I'll let you work that out. Anyway, that's the sex and intimacy. So we need to find a balance in this as well. And society, this is when, as an individual, we go into society and we find our place in society based upon our skills, our attributes, and our strengths. But if we're insecure in these first two compartments, if you like, then it can cause all sorts of problems. Social anxiety disorder, right? It's actually more to do with how you feel safe about your own personal physicality. So really, it's more about grounding techniques. As you do more centering and grounding techniques, you start to become more self-confident at depth in these here. However, if we lose all our energy because all our energy is being given away in defensiveness, we can have very, very low self-esteem because we can't go. We feel ashamed when we go into the society of others. Sometimes we grit our teeth and pretend, and then we'll try and show off then to show how good we are. Or sometimes we just hide away and we can't speak to anybody. That was who I was until I drank, and then things changed completely. But you've all heard that story before. So self-esteem, I didn't have any at all. And what I didn't realize was that I needed really just to stop for somebody to help me, to show me how to turn my eyes round and start looking deep within myself and start to find out what my skills and strengths were. And then what actually happened is, let me just do this here. These are the chakras, as I mentioned last week. Depending on our physical and psychological makeup will depend how our chakras work. Each of these chakras are associated with one of the major endocrine glands. This one here is to do with the adrenal glands. This is the root chakra, and that's adrenaline or epinephrine. That's a very powerful defensive hormone response. The second one's to do with the sacral chakra. That's to do with our gonads. That's the testes in men and the ovaries in women, and all the hormonal attributes that go with that. Now, society, this one here really is, people think this is associated with, what's the hormone, the huggy hormone called? Come on now, Joe. Can't think. But this is really also to do with the balance between something called insulin and glucagon. So there's always this bipolarity. And if these are out of balance, then we feel disturbed. And most people don't know to look in and look to this, the sense of disturbance. Some people just go immediately to the doctors, or they'll go to talking therapies and basically just say the same thing over and over and over again, right? And then self-care, then when we come in, then we get into the throat, we can start expressing ourselves because we've built up some power, got some empowerment back, and we can start expressing ourselves from our true core, which is the heart here, or the thymus gland. And then we get into the pituitary gland here, and that's the master gland. So there's a sort of whole regulatory process that goes on. And that's why lots of people at the moment are going through all sorts of physical changes because their pituitary gland is leveling up. And then the final one is the pineal gland. It's the self-actualization. Now, if you get all your biochemistry right here, what you can do is, if you're eating properly and you're meditating or you're moving in an open, loving way, what you'll do is you'll produce this great hormone, and it's called dimethyltryptamine, right? And that's called the spirit molecule. And when you get loads and loads of spirit molecule, it actually activates this pineal gland and you get bliss consciousness. And it basically opens up this here, and it gives you access then to universal consciousness. So that's what we're looking for really is. But what stops us when you know about all these things? What stops us actually taking the right actions? And there's the thing I put up last week. How do we find the balance point? Well, it's all about this chakra here, and that's called the heart chakra. Oh yeah. And so we move, we ascend. We start off with basic instincts, then we develop our own intellect. And then when we come to that crucifixion point where we say, oh God, I can't think my way out of this anymore. I've come to the end of me thinking, I'm just going to give up now. But we give up in surrender to win, but we don't give in. That's the main thing. And then as we go inside, then our intuition starts to guide us. So intuition is not knowledge-based. It's actually wisdom-based that emerges from our soul itself. It comes from the soul through an open and flowing heart, and then it provides us with the inspiration and the guidance we need to take action upon. And I'll just go through this next sort of 4-bit here as well. As this here is the body, this is the mind, this is the soul, and this is the spirit. This is the way I've connected them in my understandings. So let's see how we're doing for time. Oh, it says on my watch, time to move. There we go. You've got me everywhere. So this is what happens is it's really about, we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. What does that mean? It just means that two people in the same circumstances can actually come to different conclusions based upon how they're picking up sensory information. So what is sensory information? It's visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, and gustatory. They're the posh words for it. And what that means is how we see things, how we receive light, how we actually are, the rods and cones in our eyes, how they function, and how they interpret photonic information. So what happens is the photons come in, they hit the retina at the back of our eye, then from there, then they go down the optic nerve to the back of our head. Now, depending on whether the information then goes to our right hemisphere of our brain or our left hemisphere will determine how we see the world. And different people see the world slightly differently because everybody's unique. Okay, so that's the sight one. Sound, again, sound, the most powerful really, because in the beginning was the word. So if we can actually listen to music or tones that resonate with out of aligned chakras, if we can listen to a tone that represents a pure balanced frequency, then we can actually drop and surrender and be realigned by music. And I'm developing something called chromatooptogenetics, which is a combination of both color and sound based at particular frequencies, which will reset any out of balance. And I think that's the way forward, is in the field of subtle energy and vibrational medicine. And I think also that westernized medicine is beginning to understand now that maybe the answer lies in the quantum dimensions. And then we've got touch as well. Some people can touch us and we can immediately feel a get off me, that type of feeling, or we can be touched and feel a comforting feeling really. And so what actually happens is when we see something, hear something, or touch something, it immediately goes into our perceptual center, and we then compare it to things that have happened in the past. And sometimes if it's something that's caused us problems in the past and made us afraid, we can jump into an automatic emotionally, hang on, let me see if I can do this again, emotionally reactive state of defensiveness. And that's the problem, you see, is that most of us are not aware of what our body's trying to show us. So we jump into doing the same things all the time. So it's almost like we're sort of programmed automatons until we start to realize that there's ways to look deeper and to gain more awareness of what's actually going on. And then we've got smell. Smell's also a powerful one, It's that one when you smell something fishy, best not go forward, just take a step back, work out why something doesn't feel right, smell right. And this to me is about discernment at depth. And I think once you get more in touch with your intuition, it's almost as if these senses expand, right? And we sort of being given the ability to listen more to this sensory information and to find out what the information is that they're trying to tell us. It's almost as if our body is talking to us. And then we've got taste as well. And, there's lots and lots of stuff in food now that actually mask the taste of foods, so we're actually tasting flavors rather than the underlying food itself. And what I've found is that over time now, I tend to use less and less flavorings and taste what's actually going on underneath. And it's actually put me off some foods as well because they just taste like shit, really. And they were being covered by curry sauce and Taco Bell paste and stuff like this. So my tastes have changed, in all sorts of ways, including my values. But, I feel like I've still got a long way to go. I'm learning something new every day. So where was I going with that? Okay, so that's what happens is we receive information and then we process the information based upon, is it an immediate threat? No. And then our long-term memory comes in. Ah, yes, but this reminds you of the headmaster. So fear comes in. Our little child self goes on the defensive, and we make a decision then based upon old coping strategies from our first 7 years of life. And then we take an action, and the process carries on. So what goes on beneath the surface? I thought I knew what I was talking about, you know, a knowledgeable idiot, somebody called me. Well, they called me a know-all, knows nothing. But I didn't realize that most of the processing of my sensory information and also my thinking was going on below the level of my consciousness. And I didn't know this because I was so detached and so removed from my feelings, because I kept pushing them down all the time, that I was just living like a head on a stick. You know, don't get me wrong, I knew a lot of stuff about medicine and all that sort of business, but about myself, I really didn't have a clue, you know, and that was the problem. And I see today that most of my choices were motivated from this long-term memory, subconscious component of my mind, and stuff that I was trying to hide away from. And so that was the sense, that was the processing of information. And it's believed that 1/5 of information, sensory information, is processed in the conscious mind or the working mind, but there's 4/5 being processed below the level of our consciousness all the time. And it's what actually happens here, which is much more powerful, which sends the motivations, our feelings. So it starts off instincts. Interaction of instincts create emotions. Emotions then, as they emerge, create feelings, and the feelings direct the choices that we make. So if we start to focus on the feelings first, rather than listening to the thoughts that are being inspired by them, then we've got much more chance of changing stuff. But it means accepting the fact that all the stuff that you used to do might have to change over time, because they don't work for us any longer. And how do we do it? We do it by tuning into that chakra there. That's the heart chakra. And once we can start using breathing techniques, mindfulness, meditation, taking time out, walking in nature, and just temporarily let go in, it's almost as if our innate intelligence and from the heart starts to drive our thinking. So it calms down this emotional processing, and then we start to get more calm, cool, and collected thoughts, which inspire a healthier life. So this is where I'm going on this one now, this is where the pride and fear come in. And I find, and I use this in my work all the time, it's something called transactional analysis. And it's basically the work of Eric Berne, although it isn't really, because it comes right back from all sorts of Polynesian tribes believe about 3 ego states in everybody. So this is about all human beings having these 3 ego states. This stands for parent, this is the adult, and this is the child. And it's important to note here that they don't exactly mean these things, so don't get too hung up on these. It's just basically 3 different states of energy processing, right? And it's how we work here with our thinking and how we work here with our feeling. And the way I see this is gut, this is head, and this is heart. And I think what actually happens is sometimes when we're disconnected from our heart, right, and our intuitive feelings, we just work on a gut head gut thing, you know. And that's where I was for ages, as I say, just like a programmed automaton, just working on the defensive all the time, ducking and diving and dodging and weaving. So the parent ego state is comprised of the behaviors, thoughts, and feelings copied from our parents. So if your parents didn't have it right, you would have been fed that in your early childhood, or other parental or authority figures. So we go into school, we get fed with all the societal information and the cultural conditioning from school, whether they work for us or not. We just get all fed with the same standardized nonsense, right? Joseph, don't cause trouble. Well, it's true, right? And so we basically become programmed in the wishes and the desires of society, you know. And if the society has got your best interests at heart, then they will teach you to work with your strengths. But if not, right, if there's other reasons, then sometimes they might teach you to become good and well-behaved workers. Anyway, Joseph, stop it. Our parent self is made up of hidden and overt messages, such as you and you should, and under no circumstances, and always, and never forget, and don't lie and cheat and steal. So there's almost like an element there of, there's a religious sort of, and I call this the external moral code, that our morality, right, is based upon what we've been taught from outside of ourselves. And I think when I started to realize that, I already had an internal moral code within me. And once I started to listen to that and be guided by that, all these other things started to drop off me. And I started to feel like I was sort of emerging out of this, I think it's called the chrysalis, you know. So our parent is formed by external events and influences upon as we grow through our early childhood. And because in the first 7 years of our life, we're like sponges, we take it on board. We obviously want to please the people around us, like our parents, if we have some, our caregivers, you know, our teachers and the people we work for. We want to be good people. You know, we want to work hard. We want to make money. We want to do what society has told us to do. And, you know, we do this and something doesn't feel right. As functioning adults, we have the ability to change the messages, but it does require awareness and effort. Now, I just want to come back to this again and again. This is the child. So this to me is the emotional part of our nature. This is the parent. This represents our cognitive aspects here. And this is the adult. It's almost like a balance point between the two, but it's not. In most people, it's not balanced at all. So the instincts or the gut and the emotions feed into this bit. The thoughts and ideas feed into that bit. And if they're off kilter or imbalanced, then the adult will be an imbalanced adult. And that's where I was for a long time, thinking I had it right, but miles away from stuff, really. So the child is the ego state in which individuals behave, feel, and think similarly to how they did as a child. And most people trying to be responsible and grown up pretend that they don't have these feelings because they just don't want to accept it. And that's where I was all the time. My emotional state was characteristic of a 5-year-old child most of the time, right? But I was pretended to be a responsible grown-up. For example, a person who receives a poor evaluation at work may respond by looking at the floor or crying or getting angry, you know. And yeah, you know, when you don't expect something and it just hits you, right, generally speaking, what happens is you jump into your child state and you go back to all those coping skills and strategies that didn't work anyway, that you developed as a child, you know. And once I started to see this, right, I laugh now, it was horrendous at the time. I thought, oh my God, I've just been a big kid all my life, you know what I mean? In a negative way, because my whole life was run by negative emotions. The child is the expression of feelings, thoughts, and emotions that are being replayed from childhood. And I used to drink to get away from this, you know, and there's lots of stuff I'm going to talk about in a minute, right? The feelings and the characteristics. But the adult describes our ability to think and determine actions for ourselves based upon here and now. So this would be the bit that we should be in, really, is living in the present moment. Most people know that they need to be here, but they try and use their heads to get there. The only way, in my experience, and I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, fair enough, I don't mind being corrected, but the only way to honestly live in the here and now is by letting go absolutely, by total surrender, and to almost live in it. I've got no idea what's going on here, right? So instead of saying I know, it might be better to say I've got no idea. I do not know. Because all my life, I pretended I knew a lot more than I did. And I was always in fear of being found out. So the adult side draws on our understanding and analysis of our external and internal environments. So not only have we got internal environments of thoughts and feelings, but we've also got internal feelings and external information coming in as well. So it's almost like, I see it like a sphere with different coordinates in it, really. In addition, the adult in us is the means by which we keep our parents and our child in balance. See, when I started to see this, I thought I've never been balanced at all. And this is what I'm realizing. In order to get balance, we have to come out of this 3D mentality and surrender into the 4th dimension and the 5th dimension. So we almost have to, and I'll explain this more, we almost have to surrender. I don't know what to think. I've got no idea how to feel. I'm just going to let go of it all. And it's in that surrender and that sort of letting go that the balance, our natural, innate balance, comes to us. How do we know when we're out of balance? Because we feel disturbed. So focus on feelings first. So from the original theory, this went beyond Burns' early theories, and the original parent and child components were divided to form a new model. This development introduces what's called the controlling and nurturing aspects of the parents and the adapted and free aspects of the child. I'll explain it a bit more as I go on now. But the parent self now is being split into two. This is where the divided self was. And this is, I can see this clearly in me. The nurturing parent, so this is an ego state in us, represents more affirming and more pleasant qualities of what parents and societies do for the person. So these are the positive aspects, right? And it's all about nurture. But there's another part of us, and depends on the programs that you received in your early childhood, right? There's a critical parent. So it's almost as if that everything that was said to you of a critical nature is on a tape playing on us. And if it was particularly sort of strong, then that will be guiding the way we evaluate ourselves. And it's not even our own thinking. And that's what I realized, is that most of my actions were based upon programs or conditionings that were given to me by external things, like you're a naughty boy, you're a bad person, you're stupid, you're an idiot, and all that sort of stuff, which may or may not have been to try and motivate me to do more. It was taken on as a child who couldn't sort of work out what was going on, as I am a bad person. It's all, I'm crap, I can't think, all that sort of business. So the critical parent behaviors represent the corrective behaviors of real parents and the prohibitive messages of society. And this is really now, the way we get conditioned is basically either by punishment or reward. And what seems to be happening now in the world, I'm not going to get into this because most people who listen to this will understand that we're being bombarded by fear-based messages now. And we're almost being given this is how you should behave or else. So it's almost like the government, right, and society now is trying to treat us like children, right, because make us afraid so that we'll fall in line and not think for ourselves, So there's lots and lots of that going on. And it's almost like there's a whole wave of rebelliousness coming through people now. Joseph, move on. The child now is split into two ego states. So we've got the parents there's a nurturing parent. That's the one we want to pay attention to. And then there's the critical parents. We want to take no notice of that now and say, look, I understand why you might have done it, but I can't listen to that anymore. I'm going to start caring for myself and make my own way through the world now. The person I listened to mostly on this, a very critical, frightened woman, was my mum, and I never wanted to upset my mother. So I basically followed her way of life or what she thought was best for me. And it was completely opposite to what I needed to do, really. So the child is split into two states. There's the adapted child, which represents human response, which has some negativity in it. It's got resistance and reactivity and some hostility as well. Well, because I was such a well-behaved boy, but it was all a lie, all that other stuff was hiding in my subconscious. And when I drank, it spilled out. And, I was particularly violent and destructive when I drank. And I didn't know what was going on. I used to wake up the next day and think, what the hell is the matter with me? Right. And I can see now that it was because I was repressing and suppressing all sorts of emotions based upon societal programming. But then there's the free child. This is the child that represents the playful, the spontaneous part of our human behavior, and it can last from infancy to a ripe old age. I think I'm mostly in that one now. Causes all sorts of trouble in the environment that I work in, but hey ho, you can't win them all. So really, the adult remains as a single ego state, which can draw on the resources of both parent and child and negotiate between the two. So what we've got to do really is, the child represents the emotional state. What we need to, if you want to go further in this sort of spiritual journey, is to start to become aware is, am I afraid? And generally speaking, it's the emotional side of our nature. So once you to see, am I afraid? Afraid? Yes, I am. Where is this fear coming? It's coming because you're afraid of the head teacher and the person that it looks similar to, but it's not the same as the head teacher. So your emotional reaction is based upon a pattern matching that isn't true. And once you start to realize this, lots of the fears can start to go away. So there's that side. That's one of the obstacles, is fear. But the other one, which is much more subtle, is up here, is pride. It's intellectual pride. When we think that we know, and this is where I was for a long time, don't you know who you're speaking to? I'm a clever person. You can't tell me that. So people were trying to give me simple, straightforward advice, and I would be thinking in this highbrow way, you bloody imbecile, you've got no idea what I know. And I'm being dead honest about the way I used to think. Not that ever that never pops back every now and then. But the point about it is, this is not about ordinary pride, like pride in your appearance and pride in achievements. This is about false pride. And this was wiped away from me in almost like one foul swoop, right? When the person who was guiding me, called the sponsor, he said, Joe, you've got all these qualifications, you've got all these certificates and everything. He said, you just tried to kill yourself 3 times. So maybe what you know isn't as powerful as you. And I thought, God, he's right. And that really, he saved my life, that person, by being straightforward and honest with me. So if you're ever working with yourself, you've got to look out for pride in yourself. And if it's pride in yourself, is to try and develop or find out a chink in the armor that you've made. And in the end, you can just get rid of the armor, because in the end, what actually happens is this energy comes up from the soul through the heart, and it almost like provides a shield for you. So that's all in the grey. And what we're looking for really is, we're looking for a balanced child, a playful child. That's where all the vitality comes from. We're looking for an open-minded parent nurturing self. And what happens is, this one here, which is generally representative of the masculine, and this one here, the feminine, because of emotions and sensitivity, once they start to merge and fall into this midpoint here, then we can be said to be self-actualized, balanced, and on our way forward, really. And that to me is what this is all about. Is first of all to accept I'm completely and utterly imbalanced. I don't really know how to manage my life. I've been pretending for years. It's not working. I've come to a state of like depression. Some people say God stands for the gift of desperation. And I can see where they're coming from. Because if you feel desperate and you're worried and you're afraid, rather than, this is just a suggestion, rather than looking outwards for answers, just almost like tap on your heart. Listen to music that opens and resonates with the strings of your heart. Make sure that you're in an environment that's colorful, or it could be dark, whatever works for you, to help you to feel relaxed and comfortable. And just sit and breathe in 2, 3, 4, 5, out 2, 3, 4, 5, and just focus. I call this cradling the sacred child. If you put your right hand, or it doesn't matter really, put one hand over your higher heart, just by your collarbone, and one hand over your spleen and over your stomach, and snuggle in, and just imagine that you're cradling this child and you're sort of nurturing it. And it's almost as if you've got hold of it, and your parent self, the nurturing parent, has got the child, and he's, oh, Jesus, I get emotional when I say this. Got the child, and he's almost like saying, son or daughter or darling, I didn't realize, but I'm starting to see now that there's a better way to go forward. So how about you and me, step by step, trying things in a different way? And what I have a feeling is that my heart, human heart, it starts to lock onto the child's spiritual heart, right? And they start working together, and it's basically saved my life, I mean, I've got no idea whether we've got anything from that, but if you can apply this into your daily life, right, you can see that here are some of the things here, right? If we've got a parent here, they can tend to be the critical parents, angry or impatient body language. So these are the things. If you find yourself acting in these ways, you can almost like start to diagnose, am I in parent state? So that's got to look at your thinking, right? It's easier to change thinking than it is to change your attitude here, your emotional attitude. But if we're in this attentive, interesting, straightforward, tilted head, non-threatening and non-threatened way, then that would be the place to be, and that's a balanced state. And use words like why, what, how. But if we're into always and you should do this and never and once and for all and all that, if you're into that sort of thing there, it looks like that you've jumped into your parent state. And the child state, I want, I need, I wish, I don't care. Oh no, not again. I can't do this. All that. So let me see what the time is. Oh my God, it's exactly 8 o'clock. So there's got no time to invite anybody on, but I'll just come out of this for now. Oh, man. I don't know how that went. I just keep going with it. Obviously, I'll put this up as a YouTube video. I'll upload it after this session, and it will eventually go onto the solargnetwork.com session as well, because we're having a rearrangement of the Solargy network. So it's taken a little longer than we expected, but in the background, it's being worked upon. So that should be free flowing very soon, hopefully. Let me see. Tamara, married men just like mother. Yeah, honestly, I mean, my poor mother, you know, I mean, my mother was afraid, and I see that now, you know, and she's still going, my mum, and she still tells me how to live my life, but I can just have a laugh about it now. But it's amazing to know how many adults are actually still being motivated by almost like a frightened child mentality, you know. And I was a very sensitive child, so I didn't let go of my mother's leg till I was 38 years of age, you know, and that's when I started to live my own life, you know, and it's coming up nearly to 33 years now since I've had a drink or a drug or anything like that. So it's all been a natural sort of progress and a progression, you know, but I didn't know. And so I've been able to sort of let myself off the hook now, because really I was under the motivation of powerful instincts that were trying to defend me. But sometimes it came out in, you know, I think more than anything else is I'm not afraid of anything anymore, really, at all. Really, it's amazing, you know. What my problem is arrogance and pride, you know. And the thing that gets me into trouble more than anything else is this thing here, you know, because I was known when I'd had a few drinks to be able to cut you down from 3 miles away with me gob. And that's something that's it's still in me, you know, but I'm aware of it now, you know. And on that note, I'm waffling a bit now, but I hope that you've enjoyed that. That was session 10. Session 11, I'm going to get into 11 and 12 now, will basically be what sort of practices, and I'll get into heart rate variability biofeedback and mindfulness now. And that's my wife just singing in the background there, going for the bath. Yeah, so I'll look at mindfulness techniques and what that's all about. And I'll bring some theory about that in. And session 12 will just generally be a whole bringing all together and seeing if we can't sort of, we might have a drop-in session there for questions and answers. So on that note, thanks very much. May the force remain with you forever and ever. And Dr. Joe signing off. Bye-bye.